Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza. I have already said this once today and I'm going to say it again, but you should know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. That views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UC, IMC, or the Urbana Socialist Forum. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest, who will reintroduce herself once again.
LaKisha David.
LaKisha David. And we are here talking about
the African CU Family Reunion Project.
Yeah, I should have written that down because I had all the words, but I didn't have them in the right order. So African CU, Champaign-Urbana Family Reunion Project. Family Reunion Project, yes. Mm-hmm. And when we left last time, I had just admitted to some very narrow-minded thinking, and you were about to school me on everything that was wrong with the way I was expressing that. So.
No, it's just a little bit complicated. I guess I will start with the African immigrant population, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that their situation is a little bit, I don't know. They have to be a little bit more cautious because they might have issues with immigration and deportation and things like that.
Yeah.
So they tend to be a little bit more fearful for like protesting and getting into some of these other social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, you know, I do consider that for them. Ever since, like, so with this year with Mike Brown, the Ferguson situation and so forth.
Yeah.
Black immigration forums and groups are getting more involved because they're realizing that they are seen as, you know, black based off phenotype.
Yeah.
They are racialized as black, and a lot of this, they're also affected by racism and discrimination against black people. When they get in trouble, though, or when they face some of this discrimination, they could face deportation. They could face, you know, other consequences that a citizen don't have. So when African immigrants don't want to get involved, you know, I don't think it's just they don't care, but they're risking a whole lot more than a citizen, you know, risk. So I do consider that. I also consider, like, between African and African Americans, many of the African immigrant population, and this is not talking about refugees, but the general immigrant population that come to the U.S., they're coming from at least middle-class backgrounds, at least academic backgrounds, or, you know, their degree they have, you know, established in the countries that they're coming from. And so this middle class, when they come to the U.S., just like in the U.S., there's many other countries, somewhat classes, and so people from the same socioeconomic, you know, background tend to hang out together, and so you have this middle class immigrant population, and you're trying to mesh them with all of that is the African American population. So it doesn't really mesh well together because it's not just, you know, where we used to be family or whatever, but you're talking about class differences as well, you know.
So are you running into this problem of clash of cultures or class clash, or hard to say, but, you know, when you're getting people together, when you're saying, hey, look, you're related to so-and-so, and they're like going, oh, really? Yeah.
I haven't, well, because I'm new in the project, I haven't really run into it. But because of I have, you know, friends, you know, that's in the African American population, they do share with me some of the sentiments, and sometimes, like, even when African immigrants are applying for visas to come over to the U.S., you know, some of the messages are, you know, don't be like the African Americans, don't hang out with the African Americans, do better than the African Americans. You can at least do better than that. And so when any immigrant population, not just the African population, tend to have, anti-black biases, tend to want to move as close to white as possible as far as where they choose to live, because all of this is associated with upward mobility.
Yeah.
You know, social
Yeah.
networks and you know how you succeed in life. And there's the assumption that there's not that much value of an African American population, as if there's no Black middle class, African American middle class. So all of this is playing out when it comes to just a stranger, an African immigrant coming to the U.S. and then trying to sort of integrate in general U.S. society.
Yeah.
So in my project, the African immigrant will find cousins, right?
Right.
Some of them may be middle class, but many of them will not be.
Yeah.
Working class and poor. My personal fears as an African American, my personal fear is that they will see those socioeconomic statuses and not want to you know, connect, because, you know, why would they want to? You know, that's what I'm thinking that they might think.
Well, it's possible. And what I thought when you first mentioned, like, bringing people together and showing how everyone is connected, the flip side to everyone being connected is that also everyone is different. So it's like, how do we tease apart and educate people about the difference between being related and being alike, which is not the same thing.
Not, yeah.
You know, I'm very different from anybody else in my family. I'm related to them, but we have like nothing in common and we don't hang out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you, when you're selling this idea to somebody, how do you get that point across? That like, this is really cool, and you'll find out that who you're related to, but don't expect them to be like you, because they're not going to be like you.
Yeah.
Or probably not going to be.
Yeah, and like all of this is something that I need to sort of pull apart and I guess like document and do research and see what other organizations have done to sort this out. We just spoke about the African immigrant side.
Right.
From the African American side, sometimes a conversation could go like this, you know, hey, you know, do you want to hang out with Africans? You know, this and another, right? And they're like, no, I don't want anything to do with Africans. And it's like, have you considered where you come from? Did you like to do a DNA test? It's like, yeah, I want to do the DNA test. And what would you do? You know, you ask them, what would you do if you once you get the results from the DNA test? Like, well, I would like to go visit that country where I'm from. And so what I'm saying is that even on a day-to-day basis, it might not be part of the daily conversation, but deep down inside, there's still this desire to connect to where you come from and to have, I don't know, a sense of belonging to a community. And I think that this DNA test will sort of override some of the negative views that they have had just to survive, you know. I think that the African Americans will be somewhat fascinated in learning about the background of the African immigrant, and I believe that they would more likely want to go visit their homes, you know, in Africa. But as far as like teasing out some of the conflicts, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, well, it's complicated. I'm old enough to remember the sort of the rise of Afrocentrism that kind of in the 70s, you know, when people were like, I'm finding my roots, you know, because everybody was about finding their roots back in those days, you know. I think, isn't that when Alex Haley's book Roots came out in the 70s or 80s, something like that. So, I mean, this was just like a big thing. And there was a real resistance among some people who were like, you know, that Africa's just, it's like elephants, and, you know, they had no conception of the glory that is the history of that part of the world, you know. And it's not their fault. You know, how would you know if you were never taught? That, which goes back to our conversation last week, or last episode, about history. But, you know, there was a real struggle. And I remember watching this play out and being fascinated by it. You know, on one hand, there'd be people who were just embraced everything African, you know, and but it was indiscriminate at first. It was just anything African, you know, from anywhere. So it was like sort of stereotypical African. They all wore the same clothes. They all, you know, had the same greeting or whatever this thing was. And it was like, okay, but Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent. So diverse. You know? Right. And then I was realizing when you said Gabon earlier, I know nothing about that country. absolutely nothing. I could probably find it on a map if I could be close. I'd be within like 3 or 4 countries of it, but that's the best I could do, and that's pretty sad. That's an entire country, and
Right.
I don't know. Can you tell me anything about the history of that place?
Well, well, I don't know, like a little bit, because I only just recently looked at it.
Right.
I know that it used to be part of the Congo.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about all that comes to my mind at the moment.
So it's jungle. It's not.
No. It's developed. There's like, I think it's Libreville is the capital, and it's just really developed. And then you have your rural areas.
I meant more landscape, more what kind of geography is there? It's near the Congo is the river, right?
Well, the country. There's the country in the middle of.
But isn't it named after a river, or is the river named after the country?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, I'm
going
to Google it because I'll embarrass us both.
Let me redeem myself a little bit.
Okay.
I've been to Ghana 3 times.
Okay.
I'm much more familiar with Ghana than I am with the Congo. I mean, with the Congo and with Gabon. Because I just recently found out that that's where I'm from, and I didn't know where it was from until I found out that my second great grandfather was from there. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you have a note there. It looks like.
Yeah. So, like you were mentioning about the '70s and sort of like this roots movement back in the '70s, but I do want to share that within the African American population, it started much earlier than that.
Oh yeah, it just became popular or
Okay,
something
okay,
in the
okay,
70s. It was like it's the thing to do. It was a hip kind of trendy thing to do. It wasn't. I know people probably all along have been like trying to remember their past and recreate connections if possible.
Yeah.
Which is really hard when you're just like cut off from your past and connection. I'm repeating myself all over the place here. Connections, path. Anyway, yeah, but I just mean it just became a trendy, popular thing. Like a lot of people were doing it. There's always been a problem with in this country is people like, because it's so new. There's no like entrenched, rich history of it. You know, they try to make one, but there really isn't much of one. And what there is kind of, well, let's see, we'll just sort of ignore slavery, we'll kind of ignore genocide and theft of land, and we'll just ignore all this stuff and make this myth that's based on what? We had a revolution, that's pretty much it. And then we had another revolution when, in the Civil War, and we've had 2 revolutions and a bunch of wars overseas. And that's kind of the history of America. And there's some interesting stuff that happened in there, but, if you leave out all the stuff that they kind of mythologized, that's all that you got left. So a lot of people are always looking to somewhere else for culture. So they go, oh, well, I trace my roots back to, I am German, and so I do this and I do that, or, whatever. They look for a history somewhere else because you have to. There's not much history here except for the people who came from here, So there's always some sort of process where people in America are looking for somewhere else to find something, deeper and richer and more important than what they have, based around.
That's interesting. That's interesting that you said that, especially since in the U.S. history, there was actually a time when they were almost required to disassociate themselves with Africa, as in if they did, they would face some type of censorship or some type of repercussions from the government.
Really?
Yeah. So like
a law or.
Well, okay. So back when, like, say, 1957, when Ghana became a nation, of the first nation that got its independence. During that time, like the civil rights movement. Those African Americans that spoke about African liberation, they were censored. Some of them had their passports taken away, things like that. I'm naming the minor stuff.
I do remember some of that stuff, yeah.
Right. And so some decided, so I'm going to back up a little bit. So people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Martin Luther King Jr. was there at the ceremonies when Kwame Nkrumah, the first president, made this announcement that Ghana is a country. W.E.B. Du Bois, sociologist, was not able to go because he had already been vocal about against U.S. policies, right?
Yeah.
And so his passport was taken away. So when Martin Luther King sort of came back, I guess he made a decision that in order to move the civil rights movement forward, he had to be somewhat silent about African liberation and sort of wrap up this upward mobility for African Americans within the American dream. Right? But during that time, some people did choose to speak up, and they ended up fleeing. And they had to flee to, in this case, Ghana, because the president there was open armed, like anybody who wants to return back home, come back home, and you can come back home to Ghana. So, there's. You mentioned about people who have always wanted to find culture in other places, and that has been the American way, but it has explicitly been denied to many African Americans if they wanted to have anything in the U.S. So
I suppose that the history of that is probably played on into the future, which is now, in different ways, and in how people think about their history and their connections and things like that.
Yeah, you had a whole generation of people who, they were somewhat told, if you associate it with Africa, then you're not going to get anywhere. And, mothers who wanted to protect their children, pass these, these lessons on, that's really sort of cutting off your own soul, right? So when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King started to talk about economic disparities and African liberation, that was around the time when they were assassinated. So my point is that these lessons were instilled not to associate with Africa. So I think in the 70s, if everyone was talking about going associated with roots, connecting with your roots,
right?
That must have been freeing. I don't know what it felt like.
I think it was, but I think it was a different way. That when I said trendy, I think what I'm talking about is it wasn't a political thing. It wasn't political, I guess. A movement. It was more like a personal kind of I just would like to know where I come from. It was more like a tracing your family history kind of thing. So I think that's probably was the difference why that was okay, but the other one wasn't. Because the other one was actually saying, look, here's what's going on over there. Here's how this country is connected to that. And here's how we can fight against colonialism, basically. And if you think about it, in recent history, what is it? Just when Obama was running, what was that guy's name? I can't think of this. Some, right-wing guy was accusing him of being an anti-colonial Kenyan sympathizer or something like that. That's a bad thing.
It's okay, where's it?
And I remember people going, "What's wrong with that?"
Right.
He's anti-colonial, but he was saying it look at this guy. He's anti-colonial, as if that's a slur of some sort. And it's well, so am I. I mean, so it's everybody I know,
Well, anyway.
Any right-thinking person. But, so I mean, that kind of mindset has carried over in certain circles. It has not gone away. And so I think what made the 70s sort of finding your roots thing more palatable to them was because it was just a personal thing. It was a personal journey about culture and a way of celebrating or talking or dressing or something like that. It was very superficial, and it wasn't connected to any deep political thought.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yes.
So some of the research is saying that now with the rise in immigrant population in the U.S. and things like that, this sort of transnational communities where you have a life in the U.S. and you have a life in the home country, that this sort of decenters the nation state. You have a dual loyalty, right? And just a life that's not really for one and against the other, right?
Right.
So how? No, I'm asking you the question. This is a conversation, but like, you know, like, do you see that as a major like political move, like back in the '60s? This sort of, you know, decentering the nation state, and it's more about, I don't know, like transnational communities, you know, in your life in two places that has nothing really to do with promoting one against the other.
Yeah. Do I see that as a movement?
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
so you know, like before it was about African liberation, even though the U.S. had some very anti-Africa policies. So in a way, we're kind of coming back to that, I think, especially as African Americans sort of connect with their families, you know, in the U.S. as well as in Africa. I see that somewhat rising again. They call it neo-colonialism or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and so at the same time, African Americans have greater power than we did in the '60s. So as we are finding our communities, I think there's going to be more of wanting to look out for their well-being, using our citizenship to do that.
Yeah.
So I see it going back to being somewhat political at some point.
Yes, I do too. And here's the modern dilemma, I think, that everyone is facing in different ways. On one hand, you have this really strong desire to hold on to nation state, the idea of the nation state, because that gives you power. You know, if it was one world, one state, there would only be one power center. You know, but if you have a you know, it's like little kids in this is my half of the room and this is your half of the room. So if we could divide this room up and you have that half and I have that half, then you have the power there and I have the power here. And that's basically what nation states are about. You know, it's like, it's just carving out a territory and carving out a power base and then making the most of that, kind of. So you have a desire from all states to hold on to that, you know, because China doesn't want to give up their power over what they have, and U.S. doesn't want to give up their power. You know, all these different states don't want to give up their power. But at the same time, globalism is going on whether people like it or not.
Right.
You know, everything is traveling around the world. Thoughts, ideas, money,
People.
people, you know, and so the impetus is towards globalization. It's towards mixing what you're talking about. So it's a struggle. So if you're a country who just decides, well, we're going to just put up a wall and cut ourselves off from that, you're not going to go anywhere. Like North Korea, I mean, just look at them. They're just stagnating. They're just stuck there. They do stuff, but they starve half the time because they can't get enough food. They have a lot of problems based around their desire to just be completely isolated and cut off from everybody else. That's a non-winning strategy by anybody who's interested in becoming a world power of any sort. So I see that as like, yeah, this is becoming more political and more people are going to do that and they're going to resist, but how do you stop them without cutting down, you know, without limiting yourself in terms of your global reach and your global connections? It's a natural part of the process that's going to happen. So I see it just continuing, and there will be some pushback here and there, but it's going to be really difficult to push back in the way that they did in the 50s and 60s, because they had the control.
Right.
And they could just say, nope, you can't go. We'll take away your passport. Or we'll do this. We'll do that. But you're having more people with more money and more everything,
Right,
wanting to do this. How do you say no to them? They'll go, all right, well, if you're going to make me choose, I'll just go there, because they're not going to make me choose.
right.
And so then you have this, you know, brain drain or whatever you call it, where all the smart people are going away. So I see that it is an increasing problem that's just going to get more difficult to manage by governments as time goes by. That's my take. So it's interesting.
It is interesting.
This is a fascinating subject, and it's a really interesting topic. And I'm pleased that you came here to talk about this because I'm learning a lot from you.
Well, thank you
and
for having me
very
back.
Cool. I really appreciate it. We're vaguely approaching the end of our second segment here. Was there anything that you really wanted to have expressed that we didn't get to because I was distracting you the whole time?
Oh no! I just wanted to say that this, believe it or not, despite all the conflicts, the surface tensions,
Yeah.
this reconnecting to African family is so important to many African Americans. I speak for myself. I speak for all the people who have already tested for this purpose.
Right.
We're paying money to these DNA test companies to find our African families.
Yeah.
And so I don't want that to be missed, So I'm encouraging first generation African immigrants to also test and to reach out to those people that they find that they're related to, and let's make a family.
I think it could be just an overwhelming change in the way people think about themselves if they had that history to connect to. Because just think of all the different things that would come from that. There would be a demand for okay, let's get some real history into our schools. Let's teach our kids the real history because I know where I'm from now.
Right.
And I know that, I've studied this and I know that this happened there. By cutting people off, you don't know.
Right.
It's like, I don't know, I'm from Brooklyn. I think my family came from the South. You've got this kind of you can go back maybe a generation or two at the most, and then you're done. And so, my great-grandfather was a farmer, and my father was a whatever. It's just these little small things. But if you can go back centuries.
Right.
My family was this, and I come from this country, and we did that, and had all the. It's like an amazing kind of thing that Europeans have had all along, but all of the rest of us have not had that. I can go back to just barely past my father, and that's all I know.
Huh.
So I know he came from Mexico, and I know his parents did some sort of farm work. That's it. I know nothing beyond that. So I've got some indigenous from there. I know nothing of that history except in a general way. And I have probably some Spanish. And I know very little of that except that they probably came over on a boat and were connected to conquista. You know what I mean? It's just it just becomes vague. It's not personal. I don't own that. I don't feel any ownership of it at all. Yeah. Whereas if I could say, if I had a DNA test and I could say, well, my great whatever came from this place, then suddenly there's something there.
Yeah.
There's a relative, there's somebody that I know. Yeah. So it's weird. I can really relate to that feeling just on a personal level because I don't have any kind of history like that. So I can see that this would be really
it's powerful and empowering.
Very moving.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, but we have finished our second half of our show. You've been listening to CU Immigration Forum here on CU Immigration Forum, whatever, WRFU and UPTV. I'm about to run over time, so I've got to go. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.